Sometimes looking at a pattern where you can't see the beginning or the end makes it more interesting. And that's what this pattern is today. It is a triangle in a square. You really can't tell where the pattern begins or ends. You just see all these lines and triangles, and your eyes kind of dance all over the surface of the quilt. If you know me, you know that I have created a design stitching path that's based on steps. That's what's going to help us with this design. Let's take a look on the whiteboard. So this design is made with a square and a triangle. So we have our square, we have our triangle, and the triangle is in the square. Once we have the triangle in the square, we want to move to another location to make the next triangle in a square. How do we do that? First, we have to figure out how to get this triangle inside the square. And we do that by starting the square. And before we finish closing the square, we make our triangle in the square. And we can come off anywhere we want on the square to make the next one. The interest in this design is based on the fact that the squares and triangles are not always the same size. So I'm going to come again. I started my square. Now I insert my triangle. I close the square. Now I can come off any place and start the next one. The other thing that adds interest to this design is that the triangle and square don't necessarily always end up in the same position. Not just a size variance, but a directional variance brings interest to this design. I'm going to bring in my triangle, close off that square, and I can move down this line of stitching and start the next one. It's really up to you and how you fill the space. Isn't that an interesting way to combine two shapes that we know, a square and a triangle, into a free motion quilting pattern? Let's see how this design is stitched on the machine. Keep watching. I always offer some tips and techniques at the end of the video. I'm so glad that you continue to watch because I'm going to share another tip. This is potentially one of those designs where we can get stuck. We're quilting along our merry way in the quilt, and then all of a sudden we've boxed ourselves into a corner. How do we prevent ourselves from getting boxed into a corner? Here's one way you can do that. And of course, you know it means practice. The first thing is to practice not getting boxed in. So what you can do whenever you're stitching a design is think about your stitch path. How am I going to fill this space, this quilt, so I don't get boxed into a corner? You can stitch in a direction like this, and you won't get boxed in, correct? Or you can stitch in this direction and not get boxed in. But in both of those cases, if it's not your intent, the stitching pattern will be clearly seen. And sometimes we don't want people to see the path that we've taken. So what you can do on your practice is to create a stitching path that you can follow when you're stitching the actual design. So what I'm doing now is creating a stitching path that I can follow. This is not the design, this is a path for which I can follow to create the design. So here's an example. If I'm stitching, say, circles, and I want to do circles on my quilt and I don't want to get boxed in, I'm going to practice this direction, the stitching path direction that I've outlined ahead of time. Does that make sense? Do you see how I'm following this stitching path so I don't get boxed in? And the stitching path is such that perhaps no one will notice what direction these were stitched. We know which direction we're going, and we know that we won't get boxed into a corner. But guess what? It will happen. So the next step is to practice how to get out of a corner. And the way that I do that, if I get boxed into a corner, I'm stitching and I'm boxed in here and I need to be in here to finish the rest, either I come off the quilt into the batting area and come back on. But what if you're in the middle of a quilt and you're boxed in? You're in the middle of a 9 patch and you're quilting on the inside and you get boxed in when you need to be down here. That's when I move into the seam and then begin to stitch again. Sometimes we don't have that option and we just have to break thread. See you in the next video. And if you like the video, don't forget, give it a thumbs up.